Thanks for joining the Good Neighbor podcast. I'm Tish Taylor with Concerned Citizens of St. John. And we're going to talk today with Miss Kim Terrell. Thank you for joining us, Miss Kim. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, let's talk about who you are and how did you start?
Sure. So I'm an environmental scientist.
Yeah.
I'm all about data and numbers. And I started in 2017 working in the field of environmental justice when I joined the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic. And I quickly realized that a lot of these environmental fights comes down to science and data, but industry has a lot of information on their side, and communities don't often have the same kind of access to information that they need, that they should really have access to. So I kind of quickly realized that can be my role, where I provide that technical support. And so I've been doing that for about 8 years now.
Okay. So you are a lawyer.
I'm an environmental scientist who works with lawyers.
I see.
Yeah, I just hang out with lawyers.
Oh, okay, good.
And I sponge up information about the law. But yeah, my role is supporting the legal work with science.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I know that you do all things research and that you have been a wonderful asset to Concerned Citizens of St. John and all of us along the river parishes with the information that you bring. From day one, when you walked in, you were there right alongside us, sharing things that were vital for us to actually have, because people are always told that there's no proof. What you're saying doesn't have merit unless there's evidence. Anyone can put out a rumor and no one asks where it came from, where the evidence, and they run with it. But when it came down to anything that we did with advocacy, it was so important for us to have facts, and they were there. We just needed the people to access it. So with us starting off and having a passion for advocacy, for saving ourselves, we needed people to come in and actually give us what would help us and back up everything. And you did that from day one, and we appreciate you so much in everything that you did. So tell me about your research. What was maybe the first thing that got you started with environmental justice in general?
Yeah. So I think the first study that I really dug into was during COVID. So I'm sure you remember that St. John the Baptist Parish had the highest COVID mortality rate in the world at one point. And industry was trying to say, it's because there's a veterans home in the area and it's this and that. While at the same time, we know that people who are exposed to pollution over the long term have a higher risk of respiratory disease and mortality. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise, right? So a study came out from Harvard, which found that people who breathe PM 2.5 over the long term are more likely to die from COVID. And so they included a big US map in that study. And I thought, okay, well, let's zoom into Louisiana and let's see whether that pattern holds true when we look just at our state, right?
Okay.
Because people often want to pretend that, what applies to the world somehow doesn't apply here, right? You can emit a cancer-causing chemical and somehow not cause cancer in the surrounding community.
Okay, now let me stop you. What is PM 2.5?
So you can basically think of it as junk in the air, right? So it's not a specific chemical. It refers to all the particles in the air that are under a certain size, so that are smaller than 2.5 microns in diameter. And the reason that's important is because smaller particles can get deeper into your lungs and even enter your bloodstream. Those particles can also have chemicals attached to them. So think about when you see a big fire and you see a bunch of smoke, you're seeing those particles. But if you live in a place like St. John, where there's emissions of chloroprene and ethylene oxide and other harmful chemicals, those particles can deliver those harmful chemicals deeper into your body.
Okay.
So it's a broad term for pollution, and where you live influences what kind of PM 2.5 you're exposed to.
Okay, and that's particulate matter.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what did you find?
So we found that absolutely places in Louisiana, parishes in Louisiana that have higher burdens of toxic air pollution were the places that had the highest COVID mortality rates. And again, like, it shouldn't be surprising, right?
It's not.
We know that air pollution causes lung problems, and we know that people with lung problems are more likely to die from COVID. So it's the other thing I always come back to is this ridiculous burden of proof that's put on communities, right? Which you talked about at the very beginning. Like, why should you have to prove that people in your community are getting sick from things that are known to make people sick?
Right. Right. And it's sad, but it is true.
Absolutely.
And so finding that out, I mean, it was shocking to us. We knew generations of people were dying from COVID, but we thought that was everywhere, as usual, because our community is pretty complacent. We really just believe that this is normal for everyone, when in essence it's not. So when we started dying like we did, family members, it's like every other day somebody was calling and say, such and such died, and then our daughter died, and then this, and husbands and wives, and it's like, this is madness. And then to get the news, that this little parish, this little place would have the highest mortality rate. I thought in the United States. You're saying
I believe that at one point it was global. It was
March.
definitely in the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it changed throughout the pandemic, right?
Right.
Like, as people got access to vaccines.
And the most vulnerable had already passed.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is, I mean, it's just like cancer, right? It's when you have a disease that has like multiple risk factors and multiple causes, people always want to point to something else, right? They always want to point to diabetes or lifestyle or whatever else. But those factors are issues everywhere, right? There's veterans' homes in New Orleans. There's people with, poor diets across Louisiana. Like, you have to ask yourself, why did St. John the Baptist Parish stand out, right? Like, why were so many people dying there? And the answer is because of a lot of different risk factors, but air pollution was one thing that was more severe than anywhere else in Louisiana.
Yeah, and I always say our immune systems are compromised anyway, and that's why we're so sick. So for this to happen, it just seemed like logical.
Yeah.
It seems logical. And all of my life, we started watching people get sick. Normally towards the 70s and the 80s is when we really started noticing all kind of cancers and everybody getting sick. My grandmother got cancer, was diagnosed with cancer, cousins. And we're like, it has to do with these plants, But there was no one to verify that until EPA came and told us we had the highest risk of cancer. And that was just from one chemical, which was the chloroprene, and then compounded by the ethylene oxide. So that kind of gave us a reason to understand that it was valid. This is not normal. We are being affected by this. And then COVID just broke us down. It broke us down. But there was other research and other studies that you found out about along the river parishes in general. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty early on when I started doing this work, people would talk about the Louisiana Tumor Registry reports, right? And so there was this narrative that somehow those reports showed that there's no problem, right? So I'm like, all right, let me look at these reports and see what they say about pollution. They don't say anything about pollution. You will not find any number in the entire report that measures pollution in any form,
right?
Because they don't address that, right? Instead, what those reports do is they just say, here's the number of new cancer cases in a location, right? They don't investigate the causes.
Right.
And so industry and state regulators had been taking those reports and basically saying, oh, if there's a problem, there should be high rates of cancer across this entire area. And when we say high, we mean higher than the state average, right? Which last time I checked, nothing in Louisiana was a gold standard of health, right? So if you're like, oh, there's no problem because my health is similar to the average person in Louisiana,
You're still in trouble.
You're still in trouble, exactly. And so, and the other thing that people either don't appreciate or sort of chose to misconstrue is that not everybody from Baton Rouge to the Gulf of Mexico is breathing the same air, right? Like if you, first of all, they used parish boundaries to define, that industrial corridor, which makes no sense because last time I checked, chemicals don't pay attention to parish boundaries.
No.
And in that region, cancer risk from air pollution varies by a factor of over 1,000, right? So what that means is I could live in the industrial corridor and you could live in the industrial corridor, but we're in different places and you have 1,000 times higher cancer risk from air pollution than I do.
Yes.
Even though regulators and industry are just saying, oh yeah, you both live in the industrial corridor and there's no problem, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what it ultimately comes down to is if you want to say something about the relationship between pollution and cancer, you need to measure pollution and you need to measure cancer.
Right.
And so they were measuring the cancer and then just that was the end of it, right? So I said, okay, well, what if we actually take numbers from the EPA of cancer risk due to air pollution and we compare those to the cancer rates? Turns out that places that have higher levels of toxic air pollution have higher rates of cancer above and beyond what you would expect based on things like poverty and occupation and smoking and obesity, right? So the thing I always come back to is a disease can have multiple causes and multiple risk factors, and it doesn't make sense to say to focus on one and not the other, right? So like if people are getting cancer from breathing air pollution, it doesn't make sense to say, well, what about diet? Right? Like, why wouldn't you address all the things that are harming people's health in this state?
Yeah, they deflect and pretty much blame the victims.
Absolutely.
It's your diet.
Yeah.
It's you don't exercise. You smoke cigarettes. Well, everyone does not do that. You know, it's not true.
And if you look at data on smoking and obesity, this area is no different from the state overall, right? Like these are issues everywhere. And so the other thing that I've seen the state do is they say, oh, well, the biggest cause of cancer in Louisiana is diet or, lack of exercise. Well, most people don't live next to Danka. Right? But if you are one of the people who does live next to Danka or any other plant that emits a cancer-causing chemical, then that risk factor is important for you.
Yes.
And there's no reason to dismiss that.
Right. I know that everything that they do is specifically for a reason, and that is to negate their responsibility.
Absolutely.
For causing us to die, pretty much. And so birth rates, low birth rates.
Yeah, so that was something else that I looked at. And victim blaming is a little bit harder, right, when it's a newborn.
Yeah.
And so reproductive outcomes can be really tricky because people don't often want to talk about them, right? Like it's a sensitive subject. If somebody has a miscarriage, that might never even be documented.
Right.
The things that are well documented are birth weight and gestational age, right? So whether you're born prematurely or whether you're born full term. Every birth that happens in Louisiana has that data collected. So we were able to get that information from the state, from the Office of Vital Records. And we did a really similar study to the cancer study where we said, okay, the communities that have the highest rates of toxic air pollution, do they have higher than normal rates of low birth weight and preterm birth? And absolutely they did. Yeah. And again, it's above and beyond what you would expect based on the demographics of the area. So based on, the racial composition and people's income, there's still a piece of unhealthy births that's not explained, which we can attribute to pollution exposure.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, I can't say fantastic.
compelling is the word that I always go
It's
to
a
when
good one. That's a
I'm
good
like,
one.
how do I say this is important information without saying it's positive information,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah.
because what I'm saying is the study itself, all we need is the proof. And there it is. And that part is fantastic. But then it's heartbreaking because it's our
Sure.
reality.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
And
Mhm.
the piece of this that gets me as a scientist is none of this is new data, right? Like all of the research that I've done, I haven't collected a shred of new data. I've
Mhm.
only used data that already exists, that the state collects or that the federal government collects.
Mhm.
So all of this information was there, sitting, waiting for somebody to look at it.
Mhm.
And all of these regulators, all of these state officials who have been focused on this issue for so long, to me, it's like one of the most difficult things to accept as a scientist is that nobody did this work earlier.
Right. Yeah. And we understand that once you do that work, that there could be consequences. So what led to the consequences for you? Tell me about the research that started this.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it's interesting. Like, you don't always know what's going to be perceived as controversial, right? And while I was at Tulane, I was always told, hey, just stick to the data. If you talk about, numbers and science, you'll be fine. So the most recent study that I published was focused on job equity, right? So up until now, I've been thinking all about the harms of industrial pollution. But I've started thinking more about the distribution of benefits
Mhm.
because it's, we always hear, oh, it's a trade-off. It's a cost-benefit, analysis. And yeah, there's some pollution, there's some health impact, but the jobs, and the
Mhm.
benefits supposedly offset that. So a couple years ago, I was talking to somebody who said, hey, how do we get data on who the plants are hiring, right? Like whether they're hiring locally like they say they will. And I'm like, well, we can't get that information, but what we can get is racial data. And we can say that if the plants are hiring locally, then their workforce should look somewhat similar to the area in which the plant operates, right? Like if you have a plant in a predominantly Black community and you're hiring locally, you should have some Black people in your workforce. And so we got data from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, which requires employers to report the number of employees in different race categories also by wage, right? So we can see, okay, among like the highest paid people, the professionals, the managers, the executives, how many white employees versus Black employees versus other people of color. And then we can compare that to census data. And so what we found, again, was probably not surprising to people who live in this area, but Black people had much lower than their fair share of jobs in petroleum and chemical manufacturing facilities. And we looked at the entire country in this study, and Louisiana stood out as one of the most extreme states. Louisiana, Texas, and Illinois were the states where the disparity was most extreme, where people of color were not getting anywhere near their fair share of the jobs, especially the good jobs. In most places, when you looked at the very, very lowest paying jobs, things like laborers and helpers, people of color were actually overrepresented.
Mhm.
They were getting more of the jobs than you would expect. And so, like I said, Louisiana stood out. And then within Louisiana, St. John the Baptist Parish stood out as the parish with the most extreme disparity. So in St. John, people of color don't even get their fair share of the very lowest paying jobs. So here, about 7 out of 10 working age adults are people of color. And 2 out of 10 of the highest paid petrochemical employees are people of color. So they're getting less than a third of their fair share. And then if you look at the lowest paying jobs, about 5 out of 10 are people of color. So, it's a disproportionate burden of pollution, but then you don't even get the promised economic benefit that's supposed to go along with that.
Right. We hear that so often that it's about jobs and economic development, and none of that actually manifests in our community. We see that and we know that. There are people who I know that have jobs at plants, at different petrochemical industries, and they actually have been training people who are less qualified for for years, training people who could just walk off the street when they had to have a college degree just to apply, um, as long as they looked a certain way, and that's the reality of it. But also, I know that a lot of people will have jobs for contractors, but
Yeah.
not specifically for the petrochemical industry themselves. And at one time, they were supposed to actually have, they were supposed to be held responsible for actually hiring people in the community. But then that was removed by this new governor. So that means there's no requirement to even hire. There's no requirement written on the books anymore. It was there and not enforced anyway. But now there's not even a reason to do it other than just a promise, an empty promise. We're
Yeah.
going to hire. This is going to create a certain amount of jobs, but it doesn't say for who.
Exactly.
Because sometimes they bring their people with them.
Yeah.
When, the highest paying positions, they bring those people in from somewhere else to do those jobs, or they hire people that don't live in a parish. I always wish that there was a way we could know by, even if it were by their zip code where they lived, because what we also see is all the cars that leave the parish at the end of the day or early in the morning that's coming in. It's just unbelievable how many people that are employed here that do not live here. Mostly because they know it's not safe, but because the system is set up where they don't really hire here. I have family members and friends who have jobs at plants, retiring from plants right now, just not from ones here. So they can get a job at a plant, in another parish with no problem. But right at home, they couldn't get on at a plant, even knowing people trying to be connected. It's like, no, we've hired enough of you, and we're not putting that one more in, and that's it. And that's what we see, and that's what we believe happens because that's the way we live.
Absolutely. And if you look at where these companies are headquartered, like of all the petrochemical companies that I know of, I only know of one that is headquartered in Louisiana.
Really?
Right? Like everything else, it's Houston, New York, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And that means that a lot of the money is being funneled out of state, right? Like all these, they love to talk about, whenever there's an economic analysis of the impact of a proposed plant, they love to talk about the indirect jobs. And they come up with these ridiculous numbers that are like, okay, so we're going to hire 40 employees and 1,000 indirect jobs are going to be created because all of these people are spending all their money in the parish. Well, one, they don't live in the parish. So how are they spending all their money in the parish? Right. And two, how much more money would stay in our state if all of these executives were based in Louisiana and all of these companies were headquartered in Louisiana?
Right.
I mean, a lot of them are not even U.S.-based companies.
Yeah. Dinka is Japan.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's unbelievable. I know it's a big deal because I know that when you don't live here, you don't pay property taxes here.
Yep.
And, we make groceries. So, they don't make groceries here to bring home to their families. They go to their communities and buy groceries. They eat out. They take their families to local restaurants in their community.
Yep.
So, no, the indirect jobs, no, that's not real.
Yeah.
But that's all the things that's put in front of us like it's facts. When in essence, it's projections that never actually come to fruition more than anything.
And there's so much of this that's also common sense, right?
Yeah.
Like if industry is this huge economic benefit that it's purported to be, why aren't we the richest state in the nation, right? Or at least like the 10th richest,
Yeah.
It blows my mind, this endless narrative of, oh, well, this is going to be the plant that changes things,
Just
right?
this
Like
one right here.
this one is going to be the one that brings economic prosperity to the community.
Right.
Hasn't happened in 100 years of industrial development, but this next one is going to do it.
Yeah, I always find myself saying the same thing. Well, why is our school still poor? Why are
Exactly.
families lining up for miles down the
Yeah.
highway to get free book bags when our schools should be the wealthiest and the best in the country, considering the
Exactly.
funds that could come to them? Why are our streets and our drainage, why are we still having problems with flooding in our communities if we have all this economic development and all of this money coming into our community from the petrochemical industry? What they're saying and their actions don't match.
They absolutely don't match.
Yeah.
And the amount of tax subsidies that they get is absurd. So the other thing we did in the job study was we looked at, on a per job basis, how much these companies are getting in industrial tax exemptions. And so we averaged it over a 10-year period. And in St. John the Baptist Parish, it came out to $1 million per job in first-year tax exemptions, right? So these exemptions can last 5 to 10 years, typically 10 years. So $1 million per job in just 1 year. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Like,
wait a minute. Okay, so let's rewind that. So you're saying for every job that someone gets in this parish, the petrochemical industry that hired them gets $1 million in tax breaks?
For every job that they promised to create. Not that, and they don't even necessarily have to follow through on that, right? Just what they said they were going to do to get that subsidy. They said, we're going to hire 19 people, we're going to get $19 million in tax breaks in the first year, right? And just, if the incentive is job creation, like, why are you giving away $1 million to create a job that, if you're lucky, is going to make maybe $200,000, probably is going to make $40,000?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. It just, it doesn't make sense economically. The only way that it makes sense is if the people who are making the decisions about those tax subsidies have a vested interest in those subsidies happening.
Wow, you made me clutch pearls that I don't even have on. That's new. That's new to me. That's unbelievable. So whenever they project that, that's for their benefit, that they're projecting how many jobs they're going to produce, because that affects their tax breaks from the beginning.
Exactly. And the number is not even impressive.
No,
right?
it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Not at all. And then, like I said, we already know it's not going to happen for any of us in the community. A handful of people, and normally they're locally connected, who will actually get the better paying jobs anyway. That's just life.
Absolutely.
In general.
And St. John is also important for another reason, because, there's this narrative that it's all about education and training, right? Like, oh, if only people of color had college degrees, then this whole problem would be solved. In St. John, educational attainment between white people and people of color is almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
Only 18% of white people in St. John have a college degree. Whereas 16% people of color have a college degree. So we're talking about like 2 percentage point difference.
Are you saying that Black people are actually educated? Are you actually saying that we can
right?
get a college degree? Wow!
I know, right?
My gosh.
So it doesn't explain this massive employment disparity, you know? So I don't know. I think St. John is an important example to look at, because it challenges all of these narratives, right? It challenges the narrative that that industrial jobs bring economic prosperity to the local community.
Right.
That education is the barrier to people getting jobs, that tax subsidies, result in a lot of good paying jobs.
Right.
All of it kind of falls apart when you start to actually look at the data.
Of St. John the Baptist Parish.
Yep.
Ooh, that's not a good neighbor. None of that is a good neighbor. And that's what we talk about. That's what we talk about. Kim, the stuff that you've done is so important. It's just mind-blowing every time I get information from you. It's just like sitting at this table with you. I'm going to take you with me everywhere. It's just like, listen to Kim. Let Kim tell you. Please let her tell you with her evidence, with her stats. You know. So what happens when you become the person that has the data?
Yeah, so I think you're useful and you're a target, right?
Yeah.
So I've found it's pretty amazing, like if you just bring some basic numbers to a conversation, how much you can challenge these narratives.
Right.
Um, but sort of the flip side has been that I ended up with a target on my back at Tulane. And so it was actually because of this job study. So this study was, multiple years in the making, right? Like anytime you do peer-reviewed research in science, you do your whole entire study and then you submit it to a scientific journal for independent review. And that process takes forever.
Yeah.
So in this case, it took almost a full year between when we submitted the study and when the journal said, okay, we've reviewed it, it's acceptable for publication.
And that's peer reviewed is
Peer
what they call that.
Yep.
Yes.
And the idea is that it's more reliable, more rigorous science because a totally independent person who's qualified has looked at it and said, yes, this checks out. Your methods make sense. Your results and your conclusions make sense.
Right.
So just so happened that that job study hit the media on the very day that the president of my university went to Baton Rouge to try to get money for funding for a downtown expansion. And so the story that was told to me by my university provost was that that event was going really well until suddenly somebody brought up my job study and people started saying that Tulane was anti-chemical industry because of this study. Because of fractions. I mean, literally fractions from the federal government that I just, again, I didn't collect any data. I just said, hey, these are the numbers that the companies are reporting to the EEOC. And so the next week after that, I got an email from my dean saying, effective immediately, I could no longer communicate with anybody without each and every communication being pre-approved by her. I mean, it is just absurd, right? Like I was a judge for a science day at LSU and they sent me a thank you email and I couldn't respond without her asking me about the potential for that response to become public information. It was insane. So that went on for about a month because I like refused to believe it. I was like, no, like you're kidding me, right? Like you don't mean all communications. You just mean like you want to review press releases or something. I don't know. But no, it was all communications. And so I really struggled to try to understand how I was supposed to do my job if I couldn't communicate with anybody. I was invited to speak at a couple of conferences and she wasn't going to let me do that, right? Like, how can I disseminate science without communicating?
Right.
It's impossible, right? And that's the point. So I went through all the channels to try to resolve it at Tulane. I said, hey, there's this thing called academic freedom. There's this handbook that clearly says that my position is protected by academic freedom. Like you can't restrict me from communicating. You can't put a gag order on me. I haven't done anything wrong. It's fractions. So it became clear to me that they weren't going to let me continue to do the kind of work that I had been doing, that I was hired to do. And I don't know what their end game was, if they, expected me to quit or if they were just going to, make me ineffective. They did at one point say that they were going to rewrite my job description, which was a big red flag to me. So I spoke with a labor organizer. And this is like all new to me, like this is uncharted territory. And what she told me was, Kim, right now, they have all the power and you have no power. You need to figure out how to get power. I was like, okay, The only thing I know how to do is to tell people what's going on, right? But if I tell people what's going on, then I'm violating the gag order, and then they can fire me for violating the gag order because it's like this circular thing. So, I kind of figured out quickly, like, all right, I have to resign at some point. And how can I leverage that to sort of try to tell my story in a public way to shine some light on what's going on? Because it wasn't just my position, it was the entire environmental law clinic where I worked that was under attack from the university administration. And so my goal was to get out of there without giving them an excuse to shut down the clinic, and also use my resignation as a way to shine a light and say, hey, the clinic is under attack and it needs to be defended and protected because it's a really valuable legal resource for communities, across
We've
the
worked
state.
with attorneys with Tulane Environmental Law Clinic since we started in 2016.
Yeah.
And a vital part of our advocacy, they stand with us with facts
Yep.
and bringing the law.
Yeah.
And we need that. We don't have money to hire lawyers.
Exactly. And there's
You know.
there's not a long list of like free environmental
Anything.
legal advocate, anything. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So, and that's the thing, like if we had not been effective, they would have happily let us continue our work.
Absolutely.
Right? But it's when we win cases and when the community achieves their goals that all of a sudden the heat gets turned up on the clinic. So I ended up like working, reaching out to an AP reporter, and I resigned at like, I don't know, 8 a.m. on a Wednesday, I think. And at about 9 a.m., Tulane got a call from the AP reporter asking for comment on my resignation.
Yes.
And I felt like, you know what, I took back the power.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm proactive instead of defensive. And again, it just comes down to like being honest, right? And just telling people what the facts are. And if that's something that gets you in trouble, then it's not a problem with you. It's a problem with the system that you're within.
So Kim, tell me how you felt being one person and censored, is what I would say. How do you take that power back? How do you become strong enough to just feel comfortable to leave a position like you left?
It was hard, I think it's easy in hindsight to talk about everything like, oh, it was great and it was powerful. But like, honestly, in that moment, it felt like everything was crashing down. And like, in some ways I was privileged to be able to do that, right? Like I wasn't supporting a family. At the same time, I was dealing with some personal life changes that I was like, this is happening at the worst possible time. Like, if you want to be honest, this is all, like I got divorced, I lost, forced out of my job. Everything happened in summer 2025. It was bad. And I guess part of it was I felt like I didn't have a choice, right? I mean, sure, I could have continued to collect a paycheck, but like, it just felt dirty,
Yeah.
It, like, the longer I stayed there, the dirtier it felt. And I think probably like the pivotal point was when I picked up the phone and started calling people and saying like, hey, I don't really know what to do. I'm in this situation. Like, I can see that my job is going to end one way or another. I have I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. How can I continue to do this work? So I think I'm really fortunate to have a good network of people.
Yeah.
But I also think when you do high impact work, you develop those networks kind of organically. So that network was really instrumental in connecting me to Environmental Integrity Project. Like I knew about them and had worked with them, but it was a mutual connection that was like, well, hey, they might be able to sort of take you on a temporary basis. And so I got that lined up because I still, for some reason, thought that I was going to work at a different university. I was like, I'm a university scientist. That's what I do. So then I left Tulane, started at EIP, and about a month in, I was like, wait a minute, this is a great organization. Like, they fight for communities. They're full of really smart people. They want me to continue doing exactly the kind of work that I want to do in Louisiana. Like, I should just try to stay here, you know? And so I'm really fortunate that we were able to make that happen. But I guess maybe one take home is like, if you can't see where you're going to be in a couple months, like sometimes you just need to focus on the next week, right? Like, I'm just going to get myself through the next week.
Yeah.
And it feels really scary. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills in 6 months, but this week I can. And I'm just going to focus on that right now.
Yeah. And sometimes we're forced out because we need to.
Yeah.
We need to be gone.
Exactly.
We experience that. And it seems like crises all come together and you're forced into something that's so much better.
Yeah. And you would never, I would never have left the clinic
Yeah.
on my own. I loved it there. I loved the people. I loved the work. But I do think I'm able to be even more effective now than what I was.
Yeah. I mean, censorship should not be used at all.
Yeah.
We have the right.
Yeah.
And censorship is under attack. I mean, at every level possible right now especially when it comes to environmental justice, because we actually debunk all of the things that they're putting out there that they're calling fact.
Absolutely.
Here we are with the facts, and they don't represent the same thing. The numbers don't add up.
Yeah.
They don't add up. And so, we were like, oh God, we're gonna lose Kim. And what happens to the law clinic? How do we survive losing a vital part of our advocacy? If everything that they do is censored, or the threat of losing funding, I mean, just blackmail is the way I feel. You know what I mean? So how do we even recover from that? So I'm happy to see that when we actually had our public meetings, that we still had Tulane lawyers there with us still. I mean, just reciting the law, like they should be,
absolutely,
without the hopefully the censorship that was imposed on you because you did made such a vital statement that didn't reflect well with them. I'm just happy to know that they're still there doing their best and we can depend on them, but also that you move to a different place where you can actually just do your work.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I'm with a national nonprofit called Environmental Integrity Project.
Mm-hmm.
And they were established under the first Bush administration as what's called a watchdog group for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. So basically, a senior level person at the EPA left because he felt like EPA was not doing its job. And so he founded Environmental Integrity Project to help ensure that environmental regulators in the U.S. actually do their job. And so the organization has grown. We're about 35 employees, and it's a mix of lawyers, engineers, and scientists, which I've discovered is a pretty effective combination of skills. And the great thing is that, like, my new organization doesn't try to censor me at all. In fact, there's been times where they've had to tell me, Kim, it's okay to say that the EPA is biased. Like, if you have evidence to support this, you should say it. And I'm like, oh, are you sure? Like, I don't know. So that's been really great. And I gave a public comment at a permit hearing a couple weeks ago, and it was really liberating to know that I don't have to censor myself anymore, right? Because even though I always talk about science, right? Like, I would always try to keep it very just like basic, dry, here's the numbers. Right. Now I can be a little more saucy. Yeah. And so I think this whole thing has sort of backfired, right? It's like, if I was still at Tulane, there would be somebody sort of limiting my speech in some way, right? Like, even when things were great there, it was like, okay, don't make statements about what DEQ should be doing or what EPA should be doing. Like, just talk about the science.
Right.
Now I can do both.
Right.
And now those statements are supported by the science.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm really happy with where I ended up. I also know that the clinic is going to continue to do good work.
Yes.
And I know that the director is not going to tolerate any situation where any outside influence tries to shape the cases that they work on, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know her well enough to know that she isn't going to tolerate political interference in the legal advocacy of the clinic. So as long as they are up and operating under her leadership, they are doing good work.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I felt that.
Yeah.
I felt that. But you just were like a stick of dynamite over there. That's all. And it was time for you to just move,
Explode
hop on
out
out
of
there.
there.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
boom,
yeah.
I'm out.
Well, and the great thing is that, like, my job is to be a resource, right? So if the clinic is, working with concerned citizens, I can also be a resource for concerned citizens, right? Like, if y'all have a case that involves, chloroprene or any other pollutant, and you need information about those emissions or those health effects, like, I'm still here. I'm still able to provide that.
Yeah.
And there was, like, I don't know, if you wanted to motivate me to stay in Louisiana, the way to do it is to try to get rid of me.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm here.
That's it.
I'm here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. And I do have some questions for you. So, yeah, we'll be reaching out because we always do.
Yeah.
There's things that we need to know. I remember asking you a few questions and you came back and you was like, there's nothing I can find on that, for you. It's like nothing. And that's what you do. And it's just facts. And it's unbiased. The facts are not biased, and that's what we need. And I'm just so grateful to have met you and worked with you, and I look forward to us doing greater things. And I'm so happy now your opinion on your fact-based opinion can be out more aggressively shared when it comes down to the people that are supposed to protect us. And that is EPA and LDEQ, that's Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. And I'm just so happy that you're still here. Stay in Louisiana. Come on with me. Let's go have some gumbo and some beignets or something like that.
Absolutely.
And let's get our air clean because we want to be good neighbors, and all we want is to have liberties given to everyone else in the country. And that is clean air, water, and soil, a healthy life, and the ability to feel like if anyone comes to help us, that they should be able to do that. And you did that. You brought the facts, and you bring them to us. Today, I learned something new, as I always do when I'm in your presence. And I love seeing you and being around you because, we have to lift each other up.
Absolutely.
So, you had a whole community wanting ready to go beat up people. Like, okay, we can't do that, but we can definitely have our opinions, and we can all stand behind you and stand with you because your evidence, was so vital to everything that we need, all the proof that you did. And I just ask that you just keep doing the work and answering my calls, me and Dad. And I just want to know, what do you think a good neighbor looks like?
I think a good neighbor is honest and shares information without giving you a slant, right? A good neighbor, if you ask what's in those tanks on your property, a good neighbor will tell you. If you ask what's coming out of your facility, a good neighbor will tell you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tish.
All right, Tim. That's Kim. Thank you for joining us again today with the Kim Terrell of the Environmental Integrity Project.
Yes, ma'am.
Environmental Integrity Project. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.